Well, good afternoon, good morning, good whatever it is, wherever you're at. I am in my basement office, and I'm going to talk about chapter two in our textbook on interpersonal conflict resolution. So, everybody's had 2 weeks. Hopefully, you're used to the routine of this by now. Uh, Basically, the assignments tell you what you got to do. You don't have to submit anything in assignments except for the paper at the end of the semester and then the two exams. So if there's any other questions, feel free to email me, let me know, and we'll talk about this. So chapter two, it brings up a lot of different things in chapter two. It's kind of dry reading, but a lot of the stuff's pretty good. But to begin with, what about you? How do you resolve conflict? And I realize that we all resolve it different ways. If there's a power struggle and you're the person in power, you act differently than if you're not the person in power. But a lot of the stuff we tend to carry, and sometimes we go back and forth between different meanings. And all of that was created in your lifetime. I don't really like the theory that a lot of people put out there, your parents made you who you are. Well, they did, in essence, have a lot to do with it. But you've been given free will in your own mind and made your own choices along the way. And we'll talk about that in a little bit in culture. But your early childhood sets the stage. That's how you see the people that mean most to you resolve conflict. And that's how you base your skills on. And in your teen years, now you're more away from mom and dad, but you have your friends. And we all know that teen years and friends and in primary school can be very impressionable to us. You have a whole lot of people, and some of them you're trying to impress, and some of them you're not. And some of them are mean, and some of them are nice, and some get bullied, and some bully. So it's a real convoluted time, and you're searching out in that time frame, trying to figure out how to handle stuff. College, hopefully you're more matured by the time you get to college, and you start handling and seeing things differently. Hopefully, college is teaching you how to think, um, and with that, or at least think differently than you have thought. And with that, you're able to make other decisions and work. Maybe before college, between high school and college, during high school, you worked at a place and you actually really admired this person and you want to emulate them and you like how they handle things. So you picked up a lot of it there. So different types of conflict reactions is avoidant. The first one, they talked about three different types. Avoidant, conflict doesn't exist. I think we've all been there at some point in our life where, like, I don't see it, it don't matter. I'm not dealing with this. It's not a problem. Or you don't raise your voice. Don't express strong feelings if you're avoidant. And a lot of people are culturally raised to be avoidant. They'd rather avoid conflict than have anything to do with conflict. Collaborative. Collaborative seems the best way available. And it's when you talk to people and listen to people. Most importantly, when you actually listen. I tell students in other classes that I have, and it seems like it's true for this as well, that if you are in a conflict with somebody or a disagreement, a lot of times, instead of listening to what they're saying, you're planning on your next step. whether it's with your parents or your spouse or your significant other or your friends or your enemies, instead of listening to what they have to say, more often than not, we're planning that next step. This is what I said. Now, this is what I'm going to say next. This is what, and instead of actually listening to them to hear what they have to say. And in collaborative, we need to listen to one another. We need to find out what the other person has to say. Be open. Have an open mind. I don't expect you to be completely swayed by anybody at any time. But, if you don't listen and don't give them a chance, you're never going to hear what they have to say. So be open and don't have any dirty tricks. Aggressive or coercive. We've all met people that were aggressive and coercive. Survival of the strongest, brutally honest. Have an audience, don't back down. Sounds like a lot of politicians we've had recently. And it's something that we have to deal with it in some point in time. And they always want to fight back. So what do we need to do with all this stuff? Well, we need to deal with how we deal with it, basically. And violence, especially in our society nowadays, a lot of people seem to jump right to violence, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual. And the thing is violence isn't going to resolve the conflict. It's going to be a win-lose, and if you're on the losing end of it, it's never good. So, the thing about violence, if you have experienced violence, if you have been violated, shall we say, get some help. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. When we have a broken arm, we go to the doctor and get a cast. When we have some other disease, we go get help. If sometimes you just need help sorting stuff out. So to be better at conflict resolution, you need to be better at yourself. So try to get some help. So what creates our perspective, worldview? In a worldview, what's important in the universe? What's real in the universe? I've gone through many stages of my life, and many different things have been important and real to me. As a young man, as a college student, as a soldier, back into college, as a family man, as a dad, as a grandfather. So, a lot of times, I have I had this fantasy when I retired, I was going to buy me a $5 million mansion, and it didn't happen, But what was real was I needed a home for my family that I could afford. How do things relate to one another? It used to drive me up the wall. My sons, they never saw me drive, so I can claim innocence on this one. But they would get road rage, and he cut me off. Well, so well, I'm not going to let him cut me off. So it was important to him for some odd reason, and this guy cutting him off. It related to his world and why? What has value in your world? What things do you value? And as I said, I've gone through many different phases in my life, and I've valued different things along different times. Right now, I value peace and health, and don't lie to me. That's something that's been pretty consistent my whole lifetime. My worldview has never accepted liars. And I guess that's one of the problems I have with our current politics, because there's a lot of that going on. Your worldview dictates how people should act. And down south, we say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. My kids said yes, ma'am, to their grandmother, my wife's mom, who's from Illinois, and she got upset. Don't call me ma'am. Yes, ma'am. But that's how, we decide how we should act through how we are raised and what we think is appropriate. And South, you're walking down the street, you say hi to people all the time. Even if you don't know them, you say hi. I went to Germany and it was like, good morning. And he was like, what? Yeah, I just didn't get it. I didn't understand why they were acting so rude when I was just trying to be nice. Um, Negative views of conflict. A lot of times, conflict is perceived strictly in a negative sense. And honestly, before we brought it up in this class, when you thought of conflict, when you um, dealt with conflict, did you ever look forward to it? Was it one of the, oh man, I'm looking forward to getting an argument today. I'm sure on occasion, it's been a couple of times that you thought that way. You were looking forward to that confrontation with that person. But in general, and the textbook lists a whole bunch of words, and I only picked out a few to talk about. Destruction. Conflict is destruction. And a lot of people feel that if you are in a relationship and you get a conflict with somebody, especially an intimate relationship, that it's destructive to the relationship. Or anger. When people get in conflict, they get angry. They get mad. They get angry. War. Ukraine is a conflict. No, it's a war. Not agreeing on where to go for dinner, that's a conflict. Anxiety. A lot of people get anxious about the possibility of upcoming confrontation due to a conflict. And heartache. Especially in your younger years. I have 7 grandkids, 17 to 2. Well, the older ones are experiencing that heartache due to conflict. Uh, and it's part of growing up. It's part of, what happens in life. And I don't want to say, well, don't worry about it, but because I know it bothers them. But on the other hand, I know that with time, it won't be so bad. My mother used to always say, by the time you're grown, you won't even know about it. You won't remember it. Possibly true for a lot of stuff. When I wrecked my bike and skinned my knee and da 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 da. But there was a couple of heartaches in my youth that I still remember because the conflict that brought up the dissolution of the boyfriend girlfriend relationship was such a meaningful one to me at the time. There's also positive views of conflict in the textbook. And I really liked that perception that conflict can be exciting and helpful. And I took it more away from interpersonal, intimate relationships. And I'm sure it could be exciting and helpful in some of those. But I looked at the interpersonal work relationships that I had. And there was conflict. I want to do it this way. Somebody else wanted to do it that way. The boss said to do it this way. And in reality, when it was all over, it was exciting because we had a mission to do in the Army and we were mission focused. And we were able to pull back and say, okay, what's the best way we can do this mission? It was helpful to have other perspectives, regardless of what I have been doing. Anytime I've gotten into a conflict, it's always been helpful to have other perspectives. And we're going to talk about culture in a little bit, especially in cultural diversity. Because I don't know what somebody else feels. I don't know how this mess or conflict that we're dealing with how it affects somebody else if I've never seen it from their perspective. And I was able to grow. It was creative. It clarified things for me. And oftentimes it enriched my life and made me a better person because I learned from somebody else. And then it goes into a very long multi-page description of metaphors in the textbook. And I am going to go over each section, but I'm not going to go into the detail that they did. A warlike metaphor. You hit the target. We got to win this. When you have a conflict and they killed it, we're killing them. They killed me, whatever. If you have that metaphor of war in that particular conflict, it's win-lose. And win-lose is never, I don't want to say never because that's not good, but it's usually not the best outcome. Bullying, my way or the highway. And as a parent, I've told that to my kids numerous times when we had a conflict, especially when it was about spending my money or driving my car. No, you do it my way. And it kind of resolved the conflict parent to child because they knew either they're going to do it my way or they're not going to drive my car. But now I'm older and wiser, I guess, and I can see I could have handled some of those things a little differently. Explosive metaphor. They just blew this thing up. They blew it out of proportion. Yeah, sometimes people get excited and blow things up out of proportion, but often there's a better way to look at it than a metaphor of where they are totally destructive and blowing things up. I did enjoy reading the one on trial. And I reflected actually on a lot of the conflicts my wife and I have had over the years because they were talking about in relationships. And in trial, you have certain procedural steps you have to go through to get from point A to point B. And then you have a judge or a jury saying, okay, you're right and you're wrong. But it made a point in the book to say that there ain't no judge or jury in a relationship. Nobody's going to come and listen to both sides and say, okay, you're right, you're wrong, it's over. Because it's never really over until you actually resolve the conflict. Oftentimes, my wife and I would have a conflict, and then a couple of weeks later be another conflict, and a month or two later another conflict. And if you sit back and look at it, they all started from some other source, but there was little, as the old saying goes, the straw that broke the camel's back. There's little things setting stuff off. And we'd go through this, me saying my side, her saying her side, and we'd come to some form of agreement, but it was never really settled. And so, I can understand the trial perception of conflict, but especially in an intimate, interpersonal relationship, no, it doesn't work. Now, in trial, in the law system, it works, but not in an interpersonal, especially intimate relationship. An act of nature. He tore the place up like a tornado. Yeah, and no matter what I tried, she just hit me with a tsunami of explanations. And it's, nature can be very devastating. I grew up in Houston, and last week there was a tornado in my old neighborhood, so it scared the heck out of me. So, yeah, it's an act of, you could describe a conflict with an act of nature, but usually you're describing certain participants, and is that the best way to resolve it? See, the thing is you can use all these metaphors, but you need to find a perspective to look at something to find a way to repair it, a way to resolve it, not a way to point fingers and blame. Animal behavior. They use metaphors about how animals behave, like a wild animal. A mess. That was one I liked as well, because, this is a mess. because a mess kind of like oozes over and gets all over everything. And a lot of times when you get into a conflict, especially an intimate interpersonal conflict, uh, or other interpersonal conflicts, but most especially intimate, little things keep bringing in. You started with this, but it turns into this stew that's everywhere of every little thing that you or your partner has done wrong, and you drift away from what the actual problem was. It just gets real messy, and they often use that term in when they talk about divorces. Divorce was messy. Communication breakdown. Well, yes and no. If there is a conflict, it's probably because you're communicating and you're each finding out that the other one is upset about something. Now, you could be communicating with nonverbal cues. One thing about losing my sight, I tell people that I no longer have the ability to receive visual nonverbal cues. And they go, what do you mean? It's like, well, my significant other has what's normally referred to as the look. Now, the look can be defined as two ways. One of them is, come here, baby, I want you. And the other one is, stay the hell away from me. Don't even talk to me. Well, if you're sighted, you can look at your partner and you can tell what kind of mood they're in. But when you're blind, you can't. So, there's a breakdown sometimes in communication. But more often than not, it's you're communicating. And now you need to figure out how to communicate, because it's not like a car that breaks down. Communication is still going on. You are communicating. They may not be receiving the message you want them to receive, but you are communicating. Heroic adventure. A lot of times we get in these conflicts and it's like we're expecting some hero to come out and save the day. And that doesn't happen. A balancing act. Well, that's true in many cases. You're trying to walk a tight line and balance, especially if you are in a disagreement with somebody. You often do not want to upset them, but you want to get your point across. And you don't want to be upset. You want them to get their point across, or you want them to see it your way. That's part of the problem a lot of times is we want somebody to see it our way, and we aren't willing to look at it their way. So it's a balancing act. A bargaining table. Yeah, we've all heard the metaphors, playing on a level field and bringing it to the table. And supposedly when you sit down at the table, you should be able to talk things out, especially when you look at the older sitcoms on TV, if you ever do, because the family always sits down at the dinner table. And in our hurried world, we don't do that as often. Back then in the day, the wife stayed home and the husband worked. And when he got home, she had a meal ready, and everybody sat down to eat. And a lot of times, you have both couples working. You have somebody working shift work. You can't always, and then the kids have after school this and after school that, and you can't always, a kid can't jump on his bike and ride to school anymore. So, you don't always have the luxury of sitting down comfortably at a table to discuss things. The dance. When two people dance and they are good together, it looks great. When my wife and I dance and I can't dance, it looks pathetic. So a lot of times that's what's going on in a conflict. If they use the dance scenario, sometimes they're flowing and it's good and it's beautiful and it works out. And other times, one of them has two left feet and it just doesn't look good. The garden, if you have a garden or if you've ever gardened, you know that there's certain things you have to do. You have to water the plants, you have to feed the plants, you have to weed the plants, you have to take care of it. In a relationship, if you treat it like a garden and weed out the bad stuff and give stuff room to grow and feed it and nurture it, the relationship will work well. Quilt making. Quilt making was interesting because they brought it back to its origin of people women getting together with scraps and making a quilt. And now many organizations, they have quilt making groups and they make them for fundraisers or people that are in a hospital or certain organizations. So, you know, dancing, gardening, quilt making, that's all about cooperation to make it work better and come to a better. And I skipped one, sorry, tide. And people talk about conflict in a relationship is like a tide, it ebbs and flows. And you'll find that it's true. And it's like I told you in the last video, you know, they say it's 50-50. It's never 50-50. Sometimes it's 100 me and zero her and zero her, or 100 her and zero me. It goes back and forth. And for a relationship to work and for conflict to be resolved, you need to have that flow. And sometimes it gets bad, but then it settles back down to the constant ebb and flow. And musical improv. Sometimes improvisation in music can, if you've got really talented musicians, they can play off of one another and support the other one and make it blossom. And then sometimes it sounds like a sixth grade band the first day they got their instruments. So it's part of working together and developing and supporting one another in your strengths and to be able to handle that. So metaphoric solutions. Take a look at all these different metaphors that they talked about and review somehow a conflict that you've had. And how could you have done better to resolve that conflict? You know, look at the conflict from, was the other person or you acting in a warlike manner? Were you acting bullying? Try to evaluate the conflict using these metaphors to find out how things could have been done differently. So use the metaphors to explore ways to resolve conflict. Reframing the narrative. You know, we all were storytelling people. Before we had the written word, we passed on history through stories. So we tell narratives, tell stories all the time. But sometimes we have to reframe the narrative. Sometimes we have to listen to the other side long enough to see where they're coming from, and then reframe what's going on. If we constantly look at it from our perspective, then we will never have all the information and we will continually come to the same conclusion. What's the saying that stupidity is doing the same thing every time and expecting a different outcome? So, you know, you have to reframe the narrative. Anytime there's a conflict, there's at least two people involved. And anytime those two people are involved, you have to try to look at it from another perspective. That's what a mediator and a judge does in a divorce case. He's got to listen to both sides, and he's got to try to get them to re-say it. Because how many times have you realized that you were complaining about something and realized that wasn't the problem? The problem was something else that set you off, but that's what you're pointing to. So you have to reframe it. Perception. Your perception might be wrong. There's a cartoon. I'm going to see if I can find it. I don't think I posted it on this Cougar View. But there's two people standing on a road, and there's something painted on the road. And the one on one end of it looks at it and says 6, and the other on the other end of it looks at it and says 9. Well, it depends on which side you're standing on, as if that's a 6 or that's a 9. Your standpoint could be wrong. I'm not saying you are wrong in every conflict you get into. I'm just saying that your standpoint could be wrong, or you could be seeing it slightly different and missing something else. Not necessarily be wrong, but let's just call it misinformed. What are your filters? What created your particular standpoint? The standpoint theory of communication says that you are who you are because of everything in your life that's brought you to this point. A lot of people call it feminist standpoint theory, because it was used originally to describe how women see the world differently than men. But in reality, I am a 62-year-old white guy, and some of my cousins are 62-year-old white guys, and they never left Valley, Alabama. I see the world a lot differently than they do. I have different filters that creates the way I see things. I was watching, my wife loves watching these judge shows and these criminal, CSI shows. I think she's trying to figure out a way to kill me and get away with it. But this one guy says, well, I'm old-fashioned. Judge says, you're old-fashioned. He said, yeah, there's women's work and there's men's work. And she said, okay. So she stays home every day and you go out and earn enough money to provide for the family. No. She goes to work too. Well, if she goes to work too, it sounds like she's doing your job. No, that's not. What else could it be? Gender bias. Roles are socially constructed. That was a good segue into that, wasn't it? Roles are socially constructed. Pink is for girls, blue is for boys. I'm sure many of you have seen that. New baby, we get new baby announcement. It's pink, it's a girl, or these gender announcements. We're going to announce the gender of our baby, and we have brackets, and either they're blue or they're pink. Does it really matter? I've got 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. And I didn't know what any of them were going to be until the moment they were born. Other than my daughter, because I did read the ultrasound. My wife didn't believe me, though. She was the last one. But does it matter? To many people, it does. I wanted a healthy kid. But, these gender reveal parties, that's a big thing. And it's so big, we've had, forest fires and everything else because of it. So, but it's socially constructed. We say little girls should be this way, little boy, boys are girls are sugars and spice and everything nice. Gender is created by it's a social construct. Self-esteem is created by gender bias. I try to teach my kids, all 3, to believe in themselves. I try to teach my daughter that she does not ever need a man. I wanted her to have self-esteem and be able to stand on her own 2 feet. I've met many people that was like, no, she's a girl. She learns to cook and sew and clean house. And back when I was young, I know this is ancient history for most of you, but a lot of women went to college to get an MRS degree. And if you don't know what that is, that means they went there to find a husband. A lot of times we make assumptions of somebody's skills, abilities, and that type of stuff based on their gender. Well, she's a girl, she can't do that. The book uses a reference of a woman who's broke the glass ceiling for running for president of the United States. There have been women in power in other countries for centuries. Why is it such a big deal that we don't have a woman? Why is it? Why is there that bias? Um, because I mean, honestly, guys have screwed it up this much over 200 years. They can't do much worse. So, what's the assumptions you're making based on somebody's gender? Cultural perspective. Well, the book goes into talking about individualistic versus collectivistic cultures. For those of you that don't know what that is, in simple terms, individualistic cultures are cultures where it's all about me. The United States, for example, if you don't get a degree or you don't get a job or you don't get a promotion, it's because of you. And if this deal was a success, it was because of you. Collectivistic cultures, mostly Asian, don't look at what's important about me. It looks at what's important for the group. The group comes first. And a lot of times we get into these conflicts because we don't understand the other culture. For example, growing up in America, which most of you have probably done, it was look at me when I'm talking to you. Look at me in the eye when I'm talking to you. I can tell if you're lying. My mama always told me that. She was right most of the time, but I don't know how, because I could never do it. But in the Asian cultures, it's not appropriate for a young person to look an older person in the eye. So if you're dealing with somebody in an Asian culture and they're not looking at you, you go, what's going on? What are they trying to hide? I had a Korean professor at University of Southern Miss. I was older than him, and he said his name was Yura Zhang, and he says, "Call me Yura." And I was in his office one day, and I said, "No, can't do that." I said, "In a classroom, I'll call you Dr. Zhang. If we're having coffee, I'll call you Yura, if it'll make you feel better." But culturally, I was older than him, so it wasn't appropriate for me to talk to him in a respectful manner because he was my professor. Ethnocentrism. What's that mean? It means that my ethnicity is right and yours is wrong. In a short little blurb. There's a whole lot more to it than that. But when you deal with other cultures, you cannot be ethnocentric thinking that just because we do it this way in the United States, it's right. Or just because we do this in the South, it's right. Because culture is much more broad than the borders of the United States and other countries. Go to different parts of the United States and you will see different cultures. Culture is not tactile. You cannot go to the store and get a gallon of culture. It's developed and imprinted on us over time. I had to describe it one time in a paper I wrote, and I came up with the analogy of a rubber band ball. And I said, culture, each of us in essence is like a rubber band ball. Culture is developed as if adding one rubber band after another. Some of the rubber bands are wide and comforting, some are tight and painful. With a variety of sizes in between, adding to the construction, each new rubber band changes the mass, density, and dimensions of the ball and how it will react to outside stimuli. Just as the layer of cultures change how we as humans react to situations. And I put that in perspective. In the counseling reference, Sue Arredondo and Mac Davis said that there's three dimensions of culture. Basically, what you are born with, what you choose, what you're born with, your parents, your religion, the area you're born in, your socioeconomic class, and your disability. They put that one in that category, even though you may get disabled later. What you choose, what college did you choose to go to? What friends did you choose to hang around? What people did you, what sports did you choose to get involved in? Those things change you. And then eras or massive major events. For my mom, major event was Pearl Harbor. For many of you, or many people, it was 9/11. Many of you were born after 9/11, so it doesn't affect that. For me, if you look at my rubber band ball, I'm a very patriotic and individual, spent 20 years in the Army. And although our nation was under attack on 9/11, I don't have a tight, thin, painful rubber band for 9/11. Because my father passed away on September the 8th. And I was in shock. So 9/11 did not affect me that day as much as it would have a year prior or a year after. So the events in your life, sometimes, they don't affect people the same way. If you were a supporter of Al Qaeda, 9/11 was a good thing. Well, we done good. If you were an American citizen and a citizen of most of the rest of the world that didn't like terrorism, 9/11 was very bad. And then some people it did not affect. So understanding the culture of people, you have to understand all these different things. So how can you settle a conflict with somebody without a cultural perspective, without reframing, without listening, without looking at your perception? Because unless you're identical twins and every aspect in your life has been the same from the moment you were born to that moment in time, you're going to have a different perspective. Identical twins sometimes have something happen in their life where they have a different perspective. So no two people are the same. And resolve conflict, you have to be able to get to what's going on. I know it's long-winded. Apologize for that. Chapter 2. I had one person send me an email saying that the quality of the video was fine. I hope this one is as well. If you have any questions, concerns, gripes, or moans, email me, and I'll do everything I can to take care of them. Y'all take care. Have a great week, and I'll be here next week. Bye.